Victoria Hale had not cried in 11 years. Not when her husband's casket was lowered into the frozen ground of the Hale family plot. Not when the surgeons told her, in the sterile calm of a hospital corridor, that her daughter would never walk again. Not once, in all the years since, had anyone in the towering glass building bearing her name seen so much as a flicker of weakness cross her face. She had built Hale Logistics into an empire on that very absence of tears. 3,000 employees, 41 countries, a woman who could sit across from men twice her age and watch them fold their hands and lower their eyes before she had said a single word. But empires, as Victoria would learn, are easier to build than homes. It was a Tuesday morning in late autumn when she stood at the window of her penthouse office on the 52nd floor, looking down at a city that belonged to her in every way that mattered except the one that mattered most. Below her, life moved in small, ordinary rhythms. A father walking his son to school, a woman laughing into her phone, a garbage truck groaning at the corner. Victoria watched it all the way a starving woman might watch a feast through glass. Behind her, on the massive mahogany desk, sat a single photograph. It was the only personal object in the entire office. A girl of 8, dark curls, gap-toothed smile, sitting in a small pink wheelchair on a beach somewhere in the Bahamas. Sand scattered across her lap like she'd been trying, uselessly, joyfully, to build a castle she would never stand beside. Her name was Lily, and in that photograph, she was smiling in a way she had not smiled at home in over a year. 3 miles away, in a modest 2-story house with peeling blue paint, Lily Hale was waking up in a room designed by the world's foremost architects for accessibility, comfort, and safety, and she hated every inch of it. "Morning, princess," said Renata, the nanny, pulling back the curtains with the practiced cheer of someone paid very well to be cheerful. "Big day. Therapy at 10. Lily didn't answer. She was staring at the ceiling where her mother had once, years ago, hired someone to paint a mural of stars. The kind of thing you do for a child who used to run outside and look up at the real ones. Back before the accident, back before the wheelchair, back before the silence that had crept into the house like a slow, patient fog. "I don't want to go," Lily said. "You never want to go," Renata said gently, wheeling the chair to the bed. "But you always feel better after." "That's not true," Lily muttered. "I never feel better. I just feel tired in a different way." Renata said nothing to that because there was nothing honest to say. She had worked for the Hale family for 2 years, and in that time, she had watched a little girl's spirit dim by degrees so small that no single day looked different from the one before it. The way a candle burns down, without anyone noticing until the room goes dark. Down the hall, in the kitchen that could have seated 20 and instead sat 1, Victoria's assistant, Martha, was reviewing the day's schedule on a tablet. "You have the Whitfield merger call at 11, Martha said, following Victoria toward the elevator. "The board wants a decision on the Detroit expansion by Friday, and Richard called. Twice." Victoria's jaw tightened at the name. Richard Colton, her late husband's business partner. A man who had spent 11 years smiling at her in boardrooms while quietly building alliances behind her back. "Tell him I'm unavailable." He said it was about Lily's trust fund paperwork. Victoria stopped walking. "It's always about something with Richard. Do you want me to schedule Lily's therapy pickup, or is Renata handling it?" Victoria's shoulders dropped just slightly, the only outward sign, to anyone who knew how to look for it, that something inside her had cracked. "I'll take her myself today." Martha blinked. In 2 years, she had never once seen Victoria personally drive her daughter anywhere. Today? The Whitfield call. "Push it to 2, Victoria said, already walking toward the private elevator. "I'm taking my daughter to therapy." It was such a small thing to say, such an ordinary sentence, the kind any mother might say without thinking twice. But for Victoria Hale, it felt like stepping off a ledge. The car was a black Range Rover, custom-fitted with a ramp for Lily's chair, driven usually by a hired driver named Desmond. But today, Victoria sat behind the wheel herself, hands tight on the leather, while Lily sat beside her in silence, staring out the window at a world she was only ever allowed to watch pass by. "You don't have to do this," Lily said finally, not looking at her mother. "I know you have a call." "I moved the call." "You always move the call, and then you're stressed the whole time, and it makes it worse." Victoria glanced at her daughter, startled by the accuracy of the observation. 8 years old, and already fluent in the particular exhaustion of being loved by someone too busy to know how. "I want to be here," Victoria said quietly. "I should have been here more." Lily didn't answer. She had heard versions of that sentence before, and sentences, she had learned, cost her mother nothing. It was the 15 minutes it took to drive her to therapy that seemed to cost everything. They were 3 blocks from the clinic when the engine made a sound like something tearing. The dashboard lit up in a cascade of warning lights. Victoria eased the car to the curb just as it shuddered and died completely, coasting the last few feet into a parking spot outside a squat brick building with a faded sign reading, "Reed's Auto, Honest Work, Fair Price." Victoria sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel, feeling something she rarely felt anymore: helplessness. "Great," Lily muttered. "Now we'll be late too." The man who came out of the garage wiping grease from his hands with a rag that had long since stopped being useful for that purpose was, in every visible way, unremarkable. Mid-30s, faded jeans, a gray t-shirt with the sleeves cut off, revealing forearms that spoke of years of manual work rather than any gym membership. His name, stitched crookedly onto a patch on his chest, read, Sam. He didn't recognize the car. He didn't recognize the woman. He had no idea, as he approached the driver's side window, that he was about to speak to one of the wealthiest women in the country. "Trouble?" he asked, leaning down. "The engine just stopped," Victoria said, some part of her mind still cataloging this man the way she cataloged every stranger: threat level, usefulness, cost. Old habits. Sam glanced past her, and his eyes landed on Lily in the passenger seat, then on the wheelchair folded carefully in the back. Something in his expression changed. Not pity. Victoria had seen pity 1,000 times, had learned to recognize its particular, condescending softness. This was different. This was simple attention, the look of a man noticing a person, not a diagnosis. "Hey there," he said to Lily, not to Victoria. "Rough morning?" Lily, startled at being addressed directly, most adults spoke to Renata about her, or to Victoria, rarely to her, managed a small, "Yeah." "Let me guess," Sam said, popping the hood without waiting for permission. "You were on your way somewhere important, and now you're stuck talking to a guy who smells like motor oil." Despite herself, Lily's mouth twitched. "Kind of." "Story of my life," Sam said, already leaning over the engine. "Give me 10 minutes. I promise I'm better with cars than with jokes." "That's not saying much," Lily said. "Your jokes were bad." Sam laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him. And Victoria, watching from the driver's seat, felt something shift in her chest that she could not immediately name. It had been so long since she'd heard her daughter tease a stranger. So long since Lily had sounded, even for a moment, like an ordinary child instead of a fragile, guarded thing the world had to be careful around. It took Sam closer to 25 minutes than 10, and in that time, something small and unplanned happened. His son, a boy of 9 with the same easy grin as his father, wandered out from the small office attached to the garage, looking for his dad and finding, instead, a girl in a wheelchair parked beside the open bay door. "Hi," the boy said, with the total lack of self-consciousness that only children possess. "I'm Ben. Do you want to see the go-kart my dad's building?" Lily blinked. What? It's not done yet, but it's gonna go really fast. You can help me paint it if you want. Victoria opened her mouth, some instinct rising to intervene, to explain, to manage the moment the way she managed every moment of her daughter's life, and then stopped herself, because Lily was already wheeling herself toward the garage bay, following Ben without waiting to be asked twice. "Careful of the oil on the ground, buddy," Sam called after his son, not even glancing up from the engine, as if a girl in a wheelchair rolling into his garage was the most natural thing in the world. Victoria stood frozen beside her broken-down car, watching her daughter disappear into a stranger's garage with a stranger's son, laughing, actually laughing, at something Ben had said. She did not move to stop it. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Hale did not know what to do with her hands, her voice, or the strange aching warmth spreading through her chest. She only watched. And somewhere in that watching, something in her, carefully built, carefully guarded, carefully cold, for 11 long years, began, quietly, to crack. The car, it turned out, needed more than a quick fix. A cracked belt, Sam explained, wiping his hands on the rag again, plus a sensor that had likely been failing for weeks. Parts would take an hour to arrive from the supplier across town. Victoria, standing in a garage that smelled of oil and rubber, in a blazer that cost more than most people's monthly rent, found herself with nothing to do and nowhere she needed, urgently, to be. "You can wait inside," Sam offered, nodding toward the small office. "Coffee's bad, but it's hot." "I've had worse," Victoria said, and meant it. She had sat through board meetings that tasted worse than bad coffee. She followed him in, glancing back once at Lily and Ben, who were now sitting on the concrete floor of the garage bay, a half-painted wooden go-kart frame between them, Ben handing Lily a brush, without a trace of hesitation, without once glancing at her wheelchair as though it were the most important thing about her. It was such a small thing. And yet Victoria could not remember the last time she had seen a child treat her daughter as simply a friend rather than a fragile object requiring careful handling. Inside the cramped office, walls covered in faded calendars, and a corkboard pinned with drawings clearly made by a 9-year-old's hand, Sam poured 2 cups of coffee from a machine that looked older than his son. "Your daughter's sharp," he said, handing her a mug. Ben doesn't usually get anyone to laugh that fast. Most kids either stare at the chair or pretend it isn't there. She just told him his go-kart design was, and I quote, "structurally embarrassing." Despite herself, Victoria smiled. "That sounds like her." "She used to talk more?" Sam asked, not unkindly, just observing. Victoria's smile faded. "How did you know that?" "I didn't," Sam admitted. "But there's a specific kind of quiet kids get when they've learned that talking doesn't change anything. My son had it for a while, too. After his mom passed." Victoria looked at him properly then, for the first time, not as a mechanic, not as a stranger who happened to be useful, but as a man who understood something about loss that no consultant, no therapist, no carefully worded condolence card had ever managed to articulate to her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "About your wife." 3 years now," Sam said, leaning against the counter. "Cancer. Fast. At the end. Ben was 6. He said it plainly, without the practiced tragedy of someone performing grief for sympathy. Just a fact of his life, carried the way a person carries any weight they've learned to live with. I closed the shop for 2 weeks after. Then I opened it again. Because Ben needed breakfast. And rent doesn't care how sad you are." Victoria wrapped both hands around the coffee mug, grateful for something to hold. "I don't know how you do it. Alone." "You don't do it alone," Sam said. "You just do it every day, and eventually it stops feeling like something you're surviving and starts feeling like something you're living." The words landed somewhere deep in Victoria's chest, somewhere she had sealed off years ago behind board meetings and mergers and the particular armor of being the woman who never cried. She did not tell him who she was, not the company, not the name on 41 buildings across the world. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was simply a woman drinking bad coffee in a stranger's office, and it was, unexpectedly, a relief. Outside, Lily's laughter carried through the open garage door, bright and unguarded in a way Victoria had almost forgotten her daughter's laugh could sound. "She hasn't laughed like that in months," Victoria said, half to herself. Sam glanced out at the two children. "Kids don't need us to fix everything. Sometimes they just need someone to hand them a paintbrush and not make a big deal out of it." Victoria said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't have cracked her voice. An hour passed differently than any hour of Victoria's life had passed in a decade. No calls, no emails demanding decisions before lunch. Just the sound of her daughter's laughter drifting through an open garage door, and a stranger who spoke about grief the way other people spoke about weather, plainly, without performance, as something simply true. When the part finally arrived and Sam slid beneath the car to finish the repair, Lily wheeled herself back into the office, cheeks flushed, hands speckled with green paint. "Ben says I'm allowed to come back and finish the go-kart," she announced. "He says it's not done until it's painted right, and I have better taste than him." "Is that so?" Victoria said, crouching slightly to meet her daughter's eyes, something she realized, with a small ache, she rarely did. "Can we come back?" Lily asked. And there was something in the question, some fragile hope Victoria had not heard in her daughter's voice in longer than she could bear to count, that made the answer the easiest decision she had made in years. "We can come back," Victoria said. From beneath the car, Sam's voice rose, muffled and amused. "Fair warning, the coffee doesn't get better." "I've had worse," Victoria said again, and this time, when she said it, she found herself almost smiling. When the repair was finished and Victoria finally pulled the Range Rover away from the curb, Lily twisted in her seat to watch the garage shrink in the side mirror, watched Ben waving with his whole arm until they turned the corner and he disappeared from view. "Mom?" Lily said, and the word itself, so rarely used lately, so often replaced by nothing at all, made Victoria's hands tighten briefly on the wheel. "Yes?" "Today was a good day," Lily said simply. Victoria did not trust her voice enough to answer right away. She drove 3 more blocks in silence, feeling something in her chest that she recognized, with some surprise, as hope, before she finally managed, "Yes, baby, it was." What Victoria did not know, could not have known, driving away from that garage with her daughter humming quietly beside her for the first time in over a year, was that Richard Colton had already begun making calls of his own that morning, calls that had nothing to do with trust fund paperwork, and everything to do with a boardroom vote scheduled for the following week, a vote that would determine whether Victoria Hale kept control of the company her husband had built, or lost it entirely to a man who had spent a decade smiling at her while waiting, patiently, for exactly this kind of distraction. For now, though, Victoria knew none of it. For now, she only knew that her daughter was smiling in the passenger seat, and that somewhere behind her, in a garage that smelled of oil and old coffee, something had shifted that she did not yet have the words to name. Over the following 2 weeks, something in the rhythm of Victoria Hale's life quietly rearranged itself, without her ever announcing the change to anyone, without a single memo or calendar note admitting what was happening. She began driving Lily to therapy herself, 3 days a week instead of leaving it to Renata. And each time, without quite deciding to, she found a reason to pass by Reed's auto afterward. A rattle in the dashboard that hadn't been there before, a tire that needed checking. An oil change scheduled 2,000 miles early. Sam never questioned it out loud, though there was, occasionally, a knowing look in his eyes when Victoria invented some new mechanical concern for a car that ran, if she was honest with herself, perfectly fine. "Another noise?" he asked one afternoon, wiping his hands on the same rag that never seemed to get any cleaner, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "It's a very specific noise," Victoria said, with as much dignity as she could manage. "Only mechanics can hear it." "Uh-huh," Sam said, and did not push further, because he had begun, in his own quiet way, to look forward to these afternoons as much as she did, though neither of them had said so. Ben and Lily, meanwhile, had become something closer to inseparable. The go-kart, once a half-painted frame gathering dust in the corner of the garage, now sat finished, bright green with yellow flames Lily had insisted on adding, parked proudly by the office door, though it had, as yet, no engine and no wheels capable of actually going anywhere. It didn't matter. The two of them sat in it for hours, some afternoons, making engine noises with their mouths, arguing over who would drive first when it was finally finished. A debate that seemed to bring Lily more joy than any of the elaborate, expensive toys that filled her actual bedroom at home. Victoria began to notice things about her daughter she had somehow stopped noticing over the past year. The particular way Lily's whole face changed when she was truly happy, not the careful, practiced smile she wore for photographers and family friends, but something looser, something real. The sound of her laugh, which Victoria had begun to suspect she'd nearly forgotten entirely. It was on one such afternoon, sitting once again in Sam's cramped office with coffee that had, if anything, gotten worse rather than better, that Victoria finally told him the truth. "My last name isn't just Hale," she said carefully, watching his face for the shift she had seen 1,000 times before in people who learned who she really was, the sudden recalculation, the new, careful politeness. "It's Hale, as in Hale Logistics." Sam looked at her for a long moment and then, to her surprise, he laughed, not unkindly, just genuinely amused. "I know." Victoria blinked. "You know? Ben's teacher drives a Hale delivery van," Sam said. "I recognized the name about 10 minutes after you first pulled up. Figured you'd tell me when you were ready, or you wouldn't. And either way, it didn't change much about fixing your car." "It didn't change anything?" Victoria asked, something in her voice betraying more vulnerability than she intended. "Should it have?" Sam asked, genuinely curious. "You're still the woman who drinks bad coffee and pretends her car has noises it doesn't have." Victoria felt something loosen in her chest, some tension she had carried so long she had stopped recognizing it as tension at all, simply as the shape of her life. For 11 years, everyone who learned her name recalculated instantly, saw dollar signs, saw opportunity, saw a widow to be managed or a CEO to be flattered. Sam had simply kept treating her exactly the same. "Most people change," she admitted quietly, "once they know." "Most people are idiots," Sam said, with such simple certainty that Victoria laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her the same way Sam's had been surprised out of him weeks earlier. It was in that same conversation, coffee going cold between them, that Victoria found herself telling him things she had never said aloud to anyone. Not to Martha, not to the grief counselor she'd seen exactly twice before, deciding she preferred to manage her pain alone. She told him about the accident, about the icy road, the other car running the light, the sound of metal that she still heard sometimes in the half-second before sleep took her, about waking in a hospital bed to learn her husband hadn't survived, and that her daughter, in the seat behind her, might never walk again. She did not tell him the detail that lived at the very center of her guilt, the one she had never spoken aloud to a single soul, that she had been driving. That detail stayed locked away, even here, even now, in this small office that had somehow become the only place in her life where she felt like she could breathe. Sam listened without interrupting, Without the practiced sympathy she'd grown so used to deflecting, and when she finished, he said only, "That's a lot to carry alone." "I'm not alone," Victoria said automatically. "I have Martha, the board, Renata." "Employees," Sam said gently, not unkindly. "That's not the same as someone who just sits with you." Victoria had no answer for that because he was right. And she had known he was right for years, without ever letting herself think the thought all the way through. That evening, driving home with Lily quietly humming beside her, Victoria's phone rang. Richard Colton's name lit up the screen, and she let it go to voicemail, the way she had let it go to voicemail 4 times that week already. But when she finally listened to the message that night, alone in her study, his voice carried a smoothness she had learned over 11 years to recognize as dangerous. "Victoria," the message began, "I know you're avoiding me, and I understand why, given everything with Lily. But the board meets Thursday, and there are concerns being raised, concerns about your, let's say, divided attention lately. I'd hate for anyone to suggest you're not fully focused on the company. Call me back before Thursday. We should discuss this like family, not like adversaries." Victoria sat very still after the message ended. The warmth of the afternoon, the coffee, Sam's easy laugh, Lily's paint-stained hands, curdling slowly into something colder. She had spent 11 years building walls specifically so that no one could use her grief or her daughter's condition against her. And now, in the span of 2 short weeks, she had allowed herself to feel something like happiness again, something like hope. And Richard, with his usual precision, seemed to already know exactly how to turn it into a weapon. She thought of Sam's words from that afternoon. "That's a lot to carry alone." She had believed for 11 years that carrying it alone was the only way to keep it safe. Sitting in her dark study, phone still warm in her hand, Victoria Hale was no longer entirely sure that belief had ever been true. Thursday's board meeting arrived with the particular tension of a storm that everyone could see building, but no one wanted to name aloud. Victoria sat at the head of the long glass table, 12 board members arranged around her like chess pieces, whose loyalties she had spent years carefully mapping, and watched Richard Colton smile at her from his usual seat, 4 chairs down, close enough to appear supportive, far enough to plausibly deny any coordination if things turned ugly. "Before we move to the Detroit expansion," Richard said, once the preliminary items had been dispensed with, "I'd like to raise a concern, delicately, out of respect for Victoria and everything she's dealing with." Victoria kept her face perfectly still, an expression she had perfected over 11 years of board meetings. "Go ahead, Richard." "Several of us have noticed," Richard continued, glancing around the table as though gathering silent permission from allies he had clearly already briefed, "that your schedule has shifted recently. Meetings moved, calls delayed. I understand, of course, given Lily's situation, the demands on your time. But the board has a responsibility to shareholders, and there are questions about whether this is the right moment for you to be, let's say, distracted." The word landed exactly where Richard intended it to land, precise as a scalpel. Distracted. As though loving her daughter, taking her to therapy herself for the first time in a year, was a liability to be managed rather than the single healthiest decision Victoria had made in longer than she could remember. "My daughter's care has never once affected a quarterly result," Victoria said evenly. "Show me a single missed deadline, Richard, and I'll take the concern seriously." "No one's suggesting incompetence," Richard said smoothly, spreading his hands in a gesture of practiced innocence. "Only that grief affects judgment. We all remember how difficult things were after the accident." It was a small sentence, almost gentle in its delivery. And it was also, Victoria understood immediately, a deliberate reminder to everyone in the room of exactly how the accident had happened, of the whispered questions that had circulated in the company's earliest days after her husband's death. Questions about who had been driving, questions Victoria had spent 11 years and considerable resources ensuring never surfaced in any official capacity. She held Richard's gaze until he looked away first, a small victory that felt, in the moment, entirely hollow. The vote on Detroit passed in her favor, 7-5, closer than any vote had been in years. That evening, instead of driving straight home, Victoria found herself once again outside Reed's auto, though this time the car had no invented rattle, no fabricated noise. She simply sat in the parking lot for a long moment before Sam, closing up the garage for the night, noticed her through the window and came out. "Everything okay?" he asked, leaning against the car door the way he had a dozen times now, a posture that had become, without either of them acknowledging it, familiar. "Bad day," Victoria admitted, which was more honesty than she typically allowed herself with anyone. "Boardroom kind of bad? Or something else?" "Both, probably." Victoria looked out through the windshield at the darkening street. "There's a man on my board, my late husband's old business partner. He's very good at reminding people, without ever quite saying it out loud, that I'm not entirely trustworthy." Sam was quiet for a moment. "Why would he do that?" "Because if the board loses confidence in me, there's a clause in my husband's estate that allows majority shareholders to force a leadership vote. Richard's been positioning himself as the safe, stable alternative for 11 years. And you've just been letting him?" "I've been surviving him," Victoria said. "There's a difference." Sam considered this. Ben's mom used to say something like that surviving and living aren't the same thing. And you can spend years doing the first one and forget the second one's even possible. Victoria turned to look at him properly. "You quote her a lot." "She was smarter than me," Sam said simply. No embarrassment in the admission, only a kind of quiet love that had outlasted loss. "I figure the least I can do is remember what she taught me." There was a silence between them then, not uncomfortable. The kind of silence two people share when neither feels the need to fill it. "Can I ask you something?" Sam said eventually. "And you don't have to answer." Victoria nodded. "Richard mentioned the accident, didn't he? That's really what today was about." Victoria's hands tightened slightly in her lap. She had not told Sam this part, had barely allowed herself to think it in the privacy of her own mind. But something about the quiet office, the honest coffee, the weeks of ordinary kindness, made the words rise up before she could stop them. "I was driving," she said, so quietly it was almost lost in the evening air. "The night of the accident. I was driving, and another car ran the light, and my husband died, and my daughter will never walk again, and I was the one behind the wheel." Sam didn't flinch, didn't offer the hollow reassurances she had braced herself against for 11 years. "It wasn't your fault," said too quickly by people uncomfortable with grief they couldn't fix. "Do you believe it was your fault?" he asked instead. "I don't know," Victoria admitted. And it was the first time in 11 years she had said those words aloud. "Some days I know, logically, that the other driver ran the light. Other days I just remember that I was the one holding the wheel, and Lily was in the back seat, and I couldn't stop it in time." "That's not the same as it being your fault," Sam said gently. "That's just what guilt does. It doesn't care about facts. It just wants somewhere to live." Victoria felt her eyes burn, the first warning of tears she had held back for 11 years, and she looked away quickly, out the window, willing them not to fall. "I haven't told anyone that," she said. "Not Martha, not my own mother. I've spent 11 years making sure no one could ever use it against me." "I'm not going to use it against you," Sam said simply. I know, Victoria said, and found, to her own surprise, that she meant it completely. It was 3 days later, going through old company records at Martha's request, searching for documentation related to the Detroit expansion vote, that Victoria stumbled onto something that had nothing to do with Detroit at all. Buried in an old maintenance file, dated the week before the accident, was a service report for her husband's car, the car she had been driving that night. The report noted a brake inspection completed by an outside contractor, a name Victoria didn't immediately recognize, authorized not through the usual fleet service, but through a private request logged directly to Richard Colton's office. Victoria sat very still, staring at the screen, a cold, creeping suspicion beginning to take shape that she almost didn't want to let herself think all the way through. She pulled the accident investigation report from 11 years ago, filed away, and never revisited, because the official conclusion had been simple, tragic, and clear. Icy roads. Another driver running a red light. No mechanical failure noted. But the brake service report told a different story. A brake job completed by a contractor with no other record of ever working for Hale Logistics. Authorized privately, 7 days before the crash, and never disclosed to the investigators who examined the wreckage afterward. It might mean nothing. Victoria told herself that firmly, 3 times, sitting alone in her study with the light of the monitor, the only illumination in the room. It might be an innocent coincidence, an unrelated repair, a paperwork error from over a decade ago. But some quiet, careful part of her, the same part that had built an empire by never ignoring small inconsistencies, would not let the thought go. Richard Colton had authorized service on her husband's car 1 week before the accident that killed him and paralyzed her daughter. And in 11 years, he had never once mentioned it. Victoria did not confront Richard immediately. She had learned, over 11 years of boardroom warfare, that accusations without proof were simply gifts handed to your enemies, evidence of desperation rather than strength. So instead, she did what she did best. She investigated quietly, methodically, giving nothing away. It took her private security team 4 days to trace the contractor named on the brake service report, a man who had, conveniently, closed his small garage business and moved out of state less than a year after the accident. His final tax filings showing a payment nearly triple his usual rate for a single job completed the week before Victoria's husband died. The payment had come from a shell account, 3 transactions removed from any name that would immediately implicate Richard Colton. But shell accounts, Victoria's forensic accountant explained, almost always left a thread if you pulled hard enough. And this one led, eventually, unmistakably, back to a holding company Richard had quietly controlled for over a decade. Victoria sat with the completed report for a long time before she allowed herself to feel anything at all. Not triumph. Not even, at first, the fury she expected. Just a strange, hollow grief for the 11 years she had spent believing the accident was simply a tragedy. A cruel accident of icy roads and bad timing, rather than something engineered by a man who had sat across from her in boardrooms for a decade, smiling, offering condolences, quietly waiting. She thought of Sam's words. That's just what guilt does. It doesn't care about facts. It just wants somewhere to live. For 11 years, her guilt had lived in the memory of her own hands on the wheel. Now she understood it had never belonged there at all. She told Lily the truth on a Sunday evening, sitting together in Lily's room, the star mural still painted across the ceiling above them. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago," Victoria began, her voice steadier than she expected, though her hands trembled slightly in her lap. "About the accident." Lily went very still, the particular stillness of a child who has learned to brace herself before adults say difficult things. "I was driving that night," Victoria said. "I've never told you that, because I was so afraid you'd blame me. I've spent 11 years blaming myself. I know you were driving, Lily said quietly. I remember, Mom. I was there. Victoria felt something crack open in her chest. Some final wall she hadn't realized was still standing. You remember? Not all of it, Lily admitted. But some. I remember you were laughing about something before it happened, and then everything was really loud, and then it wasn't loud at all. She paused. I never blamed you. I used to wonder why you seemed like you blamed yourself so much. Victoria pulled her daughter into her arms, careful of the wheelchair's frame, and let herself cry for the first time in 11 years. Not the careful, contained tears she'd allowed herself twice in a decade, but real, unguarded weeping, her shoulders shaking against her daughter's small, steady embrace. I found something, Victoria said finally, once she could speak again. Someone tampered with the brakes before the accident. It wasn't just icy roads. It wasn't just the other driver. Someone did this on purpose. Lily's eyes widened. Who? I think it was Richard, Victoria said. I think it's been Richard the whole time. Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing this in the particular way children process things too large for easy understanding. Are you going to tell the police? Yes, Victoria said. But first, I'm going to make sure he can never hurt this family again. She drove to the garage the following afternoon, not for any invented mechanical noise, but because she needed, more than she had needed almost anything in 11 years, to simply sit across from Sam and tell him what she'd found. He listened without interrupting, the same steady, unhurried attention he'd given her every time she'd unburdened herself in his small, cluttered office. And when she finished, his jaw was tight with an anger she hadn't expected, protective in a way that surprised her with its intensity. He let you carry that guilt for 11 years, Sam said, knowing the whole time it wasn't your fault. I know. What are you going to do? Expose him, Victoria said, publicly at the next board meeting. I have the financial trail. I have the contractor's testimony once my lawyers finish negotiating his cooperation. Richard is going to lose everything, the same way he tried to take everything from me. Sam reached across the small table between them and, for the first time, took her hand, not with hesitation, but with a certainty that surprised them both. You're not carrying this alone anymore, he said. Whatever happens at that board meeting, you have people now. Me. Ben. Lily's got a friend who isn't going anywhere. Victoria looked down at their joined hands, calloused and grease-stained against her own, and felt something settle in her chest that 11 years of therapists and grief counselors and careful self-management had never once managed to give her. I didn't come here looking for this, she admitted quietly. Any of it. I came for a broken car. I didn't come looking for a billionaire in my garage either, Sam said, the corner of his mouth lifting. Life's got a strange sense of humor sometimes. Are you scared? Victoria asked suddenly. Of what happens if this becomes public? My life, the press, all of it. It's not exactly quiet. Sam considered the question seriously, the way he considered every question she asked him. I'm scared of a lot of things, he admitted. Losing Ben. Losing this garage. Screwing up as a dad in some way I won't see coming until it's too late. He paused. But you and Lily walking into my life, that's not one of the things I'm scared of. That one just feels right. Victoria did not trust her voice to answer that. So instead, for the first time since her husband's funeral, she let herself simply lean into another person's shoulder and stay there, in the small, cluttered office that smelled of oil and old coffee. While outside, through the open garage door, she could hear Ben teaching Lily the words to some ridiculous song about their unfinished go-kart, both of them laughing in a way that made the coming storm, whatever it would cost her, feel entirely worth it. The board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday, the same conference room, the same long glass table. But Victoria walked in that morning feeling entirely different than she had felt in 11 years of Thursdays before it. Richard was already seated in his usual place when she arrived, 4 chairs down, that same practiced smile in place. And for the first time, Victoria found she could look at that smile without flinching, without the old, familiar knot of anxiety twisting in her stomach. "Before we begin the standard agenda," Victoria said, once the room had settled, "I'd like to address something else first." Richard's smile flickered, almost imperceptibly. "Is this necessary, Victoria? We have a full agenda." "It's necessary," Victoria said, and nodded to Martha, who dimmed the lights and brought up the first slide on the boardroom screen. Financial records, Shell Company transactions, a brake service report, dated 1 week before the accident that killed her husband. The room went very quiet. 11 years ago, Victoria began, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her. "My husband died, and my daughter was paralyzed in a car accident that was ruled, at the time, an unavoidable tragedy. Icy roads, a driver who ran a red light, no mechanical failure noted." She advanced the slide. "This is a service report showing brake work completed on my husband's car 1 week before the crash. Authorized not through our standard fleet maintenance, but through a private request. Paid through a Shell account that traces, through 3 transactions, back to a holding company controlled by Richard Colton." Every head in the room turned toward Richard, whose face had gone rigid, the practiced smile finally completely gone. "This is absurd," Richard said, his voice tighter than Victoria had ever heard it. "A decade-old maintenance record proves nothing. You're grasping at conspiracy theories because you're desperate to keep control of this company. The contractor who completed the work has already given a sworn statement to my legal team," Victoria said calmly, advancing to the next slide. "He confirms he was paid 3 times his standard rate, told explicitly not to log the job through official channels, and instructed to avoid any documentation that could be traced back to Colton Holdings." The room erupted into a low murmur of shocked voices, board members exchanging glances, and Victoria watched, with something that felt almost like peace, as 11 years of carefully constructed influence began, visibly, to crumble around the man who had built it. "You wanted control of this company for 11 years, Victoria said, looking directly at Richard now, her voice carrying no anger, only a cold, unshakable clarity. "And rather than earning it, rather than simply asking my husband to buy you out, or challenging him fairly for leadership, you decided it would be easier to remove him from the equation entirely." "You have no proof I ordered anything," Richard said, though the confidence had entirely drained from his voice. "I have a sworn statement, a financial trail, and 11 years of you positioning yourself as my only reasonable alternative every single time my grief became inconvenient for your ambitions," Victoria said. "I think a jury will find that more than sufficient." Richard's chair scraped back sharply as he stood. "This meeting is over." "It is," Victoria agreed. "For you. Security will escort you from the building. My lawyers will be in touch regarding the criminal referral." The room watched in stunned silence as Richard Colton, who had spent 11 years quietly maneuvering himself into position to seize a company that was never his, walked out of the boardroom for the last time, flanked by 2 security guards, his legacy unraveling behind him in real time. That evening, Victoria did not go home. She went, instead, to Reed's Auto, where Sam and Ben and Lily were sitting outside the garage on folding chairs, the finished go-kart, engine finally installed the week before, parked proudly beside them. "How did it go?" Sam asked, standing as she approached, reading the answer on her face before she said a word. "It's over," Victoria said. "He's gone. The board saw everything." Sam pulled her into an embrace, and this time, Victoria let herself fully lean into it. 11 years of held tension finally, completely releasing. "Mom!" Lily called from her wheelchair beside the go-kart. "Watch this!" Victoria turned, and what she saw next would remain, for the rest of her life, the single most important moment of the entire ordeal, more significant than any boardroom victory, any exposed conspiracy, any reclaimed company. Lily, gripping the sides of her wheelchair with both hands, braced herself, and with visible, trembling effort, pushed herself up to standing, holding onto the frame of the go-kart for balance, her legs shaking beneath her, but actually holding, for 3 full seconds before she carefully lowered herself back down. The garage went completely silent. "Dr. Whitmore said it might be possible," Lily said, breathless, eyes shining. "We've been practicing. I wanted it to be a surprise." Victoria crossed the distance between them in seconds, dropping to her knees beside her daughter's wheelchair, tears streaming freely down her face. The same tears she had held back for 11 years now falling without restraint, without shame, without the careful management she had once believed was strength. "You stood up," Victoria whispered. "Baby, you stood up." "I'm going to walk again," Lily said, with the absolute, unshakable certainty that only children seem able to summon. "Not today, but someday. Dr. Whitmore says my nerve function has been improving for months. She thinks it's because I've been happier, less stressed." Victoria looked up at Sam, standing beside them with Ben, both of their faces lit with the same joy, the same unguarded happiness that had somehow, over the past 2 months, become as familiar to Victoria as her own name. "You did this," Victoria said to Sam, though she knew it wasn't entirely true, knew that Lily's own strength and Dr. Whitmore's careful work had done most of it. But some part of it, some essential part, had begun the day her car broke down outside a garage with a faded sign, the day a stranger had handed her daughter a paintbrush and simply let her be a child again. "We did this," Sam corrected gently. "All of us. Together." And for the first time in 11 years, sitting on the cracked concrete outside a small garage that smelled of oil and old coffee, surrounded by 2 children and a man who had taught her that surviving and living were not the same thing, Victoria Hale believed him completely. The weeks following Richard Colton's exposure moved with a strange, quiet momentum, the kind that comes after a long storm finally breaks, leaving behind not silence, but a different, gentler kind of motion. The criminal investigation moved forward methodically. Richard was charged with conspiracy and manslaughter, the contractor's testimony and the financial trail proving, in the end, more than sufficient for prosecutors to build a case that would likely keep him from ever again sitting behind the head of any boardroom table. Victoria testified once, calmly, without the tears she had once feared would betray her, because by then she had already cried the tears that mattered most, kneeling on cracked concrete outside a garage while her daughter stood, trembling and triumphant, for the first time in 11 years. At Hale Logistics, the board moved quickly to formalize what Richard's absence had already made obvious. Victoria was affirmed, unanimously this time, as permanent CEO, with a mandate she had not expected but found, to her own surprise, that she wanted: a chance to rebuild the company's culture from the inside out. She started small. A childcare stipend for employees with disabled family members, something she wished bitterly she had thought to create years earlier, when she herself had been drowning in the particular exhaustion of managing Lily's care, alongside an empire's worth of responsibility. Flexible hours for parents, or a foundation, quietly funded and quietly run, providing free mobility equipment and physical therapy scholarships to families who could never otherwise afford them. Families like the one she and Lily had once been, before wealth had made the physical burdens easier, even as it had done nothing to ease the emotional ones. You don't have to fix the whole world, Martha said one afternoon, reviewing the foundation's initial budget with a raised eyebrow at its size. No, Victoria agreed. But I can fix the part of it I understand now that I didn't before. At the garage, life continued in its own steady rhythm, though it had grown, gradually and without any single dramatic moment, to include Victoria and Lily as naturally as it included the oil-stained rags and the ancient coffee machine and the go-kart that Ben now drove proudly around the empty lot behind the shop. Lily cheering from her wheelchair beside the finish line they'd painted themselves. Victoria still came by most afternoons, though the invented mechanical noises had long since stopped being necessary as pretense. Some days, she brought takeout for all four of them, crowding around the small desk in Sam's office because the shop had no dining table and none of them particularly minded. Other days, she simply sat on an overturned crate near the garage bay, laptop balanced on her knees, working through emails, while Sam worked beneath whatever car needed his attention that day, the two of them existing comfortably in the same space, without needing to fill every silence with conversation. You know, Sam said one evening, closing up the shop as Victoria waited to drive Lily home. Ben asked me last week if you two were going to get married. Victoria felt her cheeks warm, an unfamiliar and not unwelcome sensation. What did you tell him? I told him some things take time, and that rushing the good stuff usually ruins it. Sam leaned against the doorframe, studying her with the same steady attention he'd given her from the very first day. But I also told him I wasn't in any hurry to let you two go anywhere. Good answer, Victoria said softly. I've had some practice, Sam said. 3 years of answering hard questions from a 9-year-old teaches you to think fast. Through the open bay door, they could hear Ben and Lily arguing amiably about whose turn it was to steer the go-kart next, an argument that had by now become as familiar and comforting as any lullaby. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone, Victoria said quietly, watching the two children through the doorway. I built an entire empire on that idea. And now? Sam asked. Now I think strength was letting my car break down outside the right garage, Victoria said, and being brave enough to let a stranger fix more than just the engine. Sam reached out and took her hand, the same gesture that had become, over the past months, as natural to both of them as breathing. For what it's worth, he said. I think Lily's not the only Hale who's been getting stronger these past few months. Victoria smiled, watching her daughter laugh in the golden evening light, watching the boy who had once handed her a paintbrush without a second thought, now help her navigate a slightly uneven patch of gravel with the same unthinking, easy kindness. Somewhere in the distance, a car pulled up outside the garage. Another stranger, perhaps, with another small mechanical trouble about to discover, the way Victoria once had, that sometimes the most ordinary, unremarkable places hold the exact repair a broken life has been waiting for. The finale was still to come, the quiet, full-circle moment neither of them yet knew was approaching. But for now, in the fading light outside a small garage that smelled of oil and old coffee, Victoria Hale simply stood beside a man who had never once needed her name to know her worth, and let herself, fully and without reservation, belong somewhere. 6 months passed in the particular way that healing time always does, slower in the living of it than in the remembering. Each small victory folding quietly into the next, until one day, without any single dramatic turning point, an entirely different life had been built on top of the wreckage of the old one. Lily's legs grew stronger by careful, patient degrees. She could stand now for nearly a minute unassisted, could take 2, sometimes 3 wobbling steps between her wheelchair and a waiting hand, though the wheelchair remained, for longer trips, still a necessary and unremarkable part of her daily life. Dr. Whitmore called her progress remarkable, though she was always careful to add, gently, That remarkable did not mean guaranteed, that some children's nerve pathways healed further than others, and that whatever happened, Lily's worth had never depended on the outcome. Lily herself seemed to understand this better than any adult around her. "I don't need to walk to be happy," she told Victoria one evening, matter of fact in the way only children can manage. "I was happy before I could stand, too. I just like being able to hug Ben without him having to bend down so much." It was, Victoria had come to realize, one of the great unexpected gifts of the entire ordeal, watching her daughter grow not just physically stronger, but into a kind of wisdom about her own worth that Victoria herself, even now, was still learning. Hale Logistics, under Victoria's full and uncontested leadership, had grown quieter in its boardroom, but louder in its impact. The foundation she'd built in Richard's shadow, now funding mobility scholarships for over 300 families across the country, a number that grew every month. Each name on the list, a small, private tribute to the two people who had taught her that some repairs mattered more than others. Richard's trial concluded in early spring, a conviction that closed, finally and completely, the last locked door of Victoria's old life. She did not attend the sentencing. She had by then no need to watch him pay for what he'd taken. She was too busy living the life he had, in his cruelty, accidentally helped her find. It was a Saturday in early summer when Victoria drove out to the garage for what had become, over the past year, an entirely ordinary reason. Nothing was wrong with the car at all. She was simply picking up Lily, who had spent the afternoon there with Ben, while Victoria handled a foundation board meeting. And Sam, closing up early for once, had promised to grill dinner for all of them behind the shop. She pulled into the familiar lot, past the faded sign that still read, "Reed's Auto, honest work, fair price," a sign Sam had refused, despite Victoria's gentle teasing, to ever repaint. And there, exactly as it had been the very first day, exactly as it would remain painted into her memory for the rest of her life, Victoria saw her daughter, wheelchair pushed to its fastest speed across the gravel lot, arms outstretched, face lit with a joy so complete it seemed to erase entirely every hard year that had come before it. "Sam!" Lily called, wheeling toward him with everything she had. A year ago, Victoria had frozen at exactly this sight, standing paralyzed beside a broken-down car, watching her daughter run toward a stranger's kindness, too stunned by hope to move, too afraid to believe it could be real. This time, Victoria did not freeze at all. This time, she stepped out of the car and ran too, crossing the gravel lot in a few quick strides, reaching Sam and Lily just as Ben came barreling out of the garage to join them. And for a long, warm moment, all four of them stood together in the golden evening light, laughing at nothing in particular, simply present, simply whole, in a way none of them could have imagined the day a broken engine had first brought two shattered families together. Sam caught Victoria's eye over the children's heads, and in his expression, she saw the same quiet question he'd been carrying gently, patiently, for months now, never rushing her, never demanding an answer before she was ready. "Ask me again," Victoria said softly, so only he could hear. Sam's eyebrows rose. "Ask you what?" "What Ben's been asking you," Victoria said, smiling. "Whether we're going to get married." Sam went very still, searching her face for certainty. "Are you saying yes to a question I haven't even asked yet?" "I'm saying," Victoria said, taking his grease-stained hand in hers, unbothered as she had been unbothered for months now, by the dirt beneath his nails or the oil on his sleeves, "that I'm done waiting for the perfect moment to ask for what I actually want." Later, neither of them could quite remember who proposed to whom first, only that the sun was setting behind the garage, that Ben had whooped loudly enough to startle a flock of pigeons off the roof, that Lily had cried happy tears while insisting she'd known it would happen months ago, and that somewhere in the golden light of that ordinary Saturday, two broken families became, quietly and without any grand announcement to the world beyond their own small gravel lot, one whole one. A year after that, on a night much like the very first, Victoria stood at the same window in her old penthouse office, though she rarely worked from it now, having moved most of her days to a smaller, brighter office, closer to the Foundation's headquarters, closer to Lily's school, closer to the garage that had, somewhere along the way, become the true center of her life. She looked down at the city below, the same ordinary rhythm she had once watched with such starving distance, and thought of the photograph that still sat on her desk, though it had multiplied now into a small collection. Lily on the beach in her old wheelchair. Lily standing, wobbling but proud, beside a finished go-kart. A wedding photo, small and simple, held in the garage's gravel lot with folding chairs and string lights, more meaningful to Victoria than any gala she had ever hosted in this very building. Wealth, she had come to understand, had never been the thing that saved her. It had bought comfort, certainly, safety, certainly, but it had taken a broken-down car and an honest mechanic's simple kindness to teach her the difference between having everything and actually living. Somewhere below, in an ordinary house with peeling blue paint that Victoria had, over Sam's gentle protests, quietly helped repaint the year before, her family was waiting for her, unremarkable in every way that mattered most, and entirely, completely, everything she had never known to hope for. She turned off the office light and went home,